One of the first videos I ever made on my YouTube channel was a desk setup video in which I actually set up everything, including the desk itself. And while I had a lot of fun doing it, it was the first time I had ever attempted anything like it, meaning there were some things I definitely could have done better. But now, it's a new year, and over the course of me making these videos for the past couple of months, I've learned a lot and upgraded my setup quite a bit. So I think it's time I show you the ultimate hybrid desk setup for 2025. Before we dive into the specifics, I want to quickly go over what the purpose of this setup is and why I've made the choices that I have. In my case, I wanted to have a single desk that could function as the primary hub for a bunch of things all at once. Now, in my case, that means writing, filming, and editing YouTube videos, doing some light gaming, working from home at my day job, and occasionally making music. That's a lot of stuff to have to fit into one space, but I think I managed it pretty well. Other than that, the general idea was to keep everything as simple and clutter-free as possible while still being easily accessible. Now, bear in mind that this is still a work in progress, and there certainly are things I could have done better. I literally just made a whole video about how much I suck at cable management. But my hope is that you walk away from this video with a bit of inspiration for your own setup, as well as maybe a fresh take on a thing or two that you haven't seen before. In exchange, all you have to do is press the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of this stuff. There are links to everything in the description. Let's talk about it. Every desk setup starts with a desk. Therefore, if you want to have a good setup, it would make sense to get a good desk. But to be honest, and please excuse my terrible impression of a Swedish accent, Trotten desk from IKEA is, at best, okay. Look, I'll start with the positives first. The tabletop is pretty solid and holds up well to scratches and marks. I've had mine for about 1.5 years now, and it still doesn't have a mark on it that it didn't already have when I bought it. I've pretty much mutilated the underside of it with various screws and bits of tape, and yet, from where I'm sitting, all I see is a nice white surface that's durable and super easy to keep clean. Also, it is technically a sit-stand desk. And that's where my positive notes end. So, first of all, like I said, this is a standing desk. But what I didn't say is how you adjust the height of this thing. You see, this thing is completely analog, so instead of having a little button or a switch to help you set the height of the desk, you have this little handle that you have to pull out, and then to adjust the height, you have to manually crank it like you were trying to start a car back in the early 1900s. And much like those old cars, this thing is really goddamn slow. Then there's the wobble. You know how on some standing desks, they're pretty solid when you're sitting down, but then if you crank the height all the way up, it becomes pretty susceptible to wobbling? Well, in spite of this being a relatively cheap desk, this one actually managed to pack in some extra features by giving you the full wobble even at sitting height. That's right, I can't tell you how much fun I've had just sitting down to do some light work like writing an email and seeing how me typing on a keyboard instantly turns every single item on my desk into one of those bobbleheads people would put in their cars before they had smartphones. And of course, when you have the legs stretched out to their highest setting, the whole desk becomes so unstable that a light breeze would turn it into a desk-sized earthquake simulator. Oh, and all of this comes at a price of $370. Now, to be fair, I bought mine off of Facebook Marketplace for like $40, and at that price, it is actually a pretty good desk. But at the full asking price, you'd be better off forking out just a tiny bit more and getting an electric standing desk from something like FlexiSpot. Now, all that being said, this video is meant to highlight the good sides of my setup, and while I did think it was important to tell you why you absolutely should not buy this desk, at least at full price, I also think it's important to tell you that I've gotten by just fine with it. So much so that I have yet to replace it. And that's the point I want to make here. At the end of the day, yes, having a nice desk is absolutely great, but if you're on a budget or if you're just getting started on your desk setup journey, then you can absolutely make do with something less than ideal. This desk is far from perfect, but it has served me tremendously well, and I expect to get some more great months or even years out of this thing before I finally switch it out for something new. And let's not forget, it still costs less than a desk mat from GroveMate. So, the second most essential accessory to a desk setup, but one I'd argue is way more important to invest in, is a good chair. For my setup, I went with the Ergo 312 from DPJ Workspace. I did a full video on it a while back, which you can find right here on my channel, but the short version is that it's a very affordable office chair, which does pretty well for the price range it's in. It's pretty comfortable and fairly adjustable, but I do wish it had better lumbar support as well as a better headrest, so I'm probably going to have to replace it at some point in the next year or so. But overall, it's definitely a pretty decent chair and a massive step up from the old ass IKEA chair I was rocking prior to it. Next, I decided to level up my footrest to match with the chair and found this adjustable footrest from a brand called MaxMount. It's pretty plush and honestly feels a lot better than the cheap IKEA footrest I had before, so if you're someone that likes to put their feet up, I definitely recommend getting something padded as long as you can find it at a decent price. Alright, let's talk about this dual monitor setup. A few months ago, I made the choice to switch to a stacked monitor setup, and honestly, I really love it. Now, there are some drawbacks to stacking your monitors like this, but if you're interested to know more, I have a video about that on my channel as well. As far as the monitors go, I still have the same two as when I initially put together this setup. The main display is an ASUS 27-inch 1440p monitor with a refresh rate of 165 Hz. And yeah, I know, here in the desk setup community on YouTube, you're not supposed to have anything less than a 4K 240Hz OLED monitor these days. But out here in the real world, there are about 100 things I'd rather spend $1,000 on than a better monitor for my computer. And that's not counting the extra costs associated with making such a purchase, such as getting a better graphics card to make the most of that monitor, as well as the cost of having to hire a good divorce lawyer. Now, all jokes aside, this thing does have some drawbacks, one of which being a less than stellar color accuracy, which you can imagine is a little annoying seeing as these days I primarily use it for video editing, which is why my videos look like this instead of, more professional. Well, that and I don't have time to study for whichever advanced degree you need to figure all this shit out. All that being said, it's still decent enough, especially when it comes to gaming, so I'm gonna hold off on upgrading until I find a monitor I really like that I won't have to sell my kidney for. The secondary display is an older EliteDisplay from HP. It's also 27 inches and 1440p, though it only has a refresh rate of 60 Hz, but since I never used that one for gaming, it's not really an issue. Again, maybe I'll replace this one as well at some point, or maybe I'll even get rid of the dual monitor setup entirely and go for one bigger monitor instead. But for the time being, I'm really enjoying how this setup works. Now, technically, we do have one more monitor to talk about in this setup, and that's the Elgato Prompter. And yes, it is a teleprompter, but the way it's set up, it also functions as an extra monitor for your computer, meaning I could theoretically put anything on here, including playing games on it. Now, obviously, I primarily use this as a teleprompter for when I'm filming these videos, but I know a lot of people like to put their Zoom calls on it so you can look straight at the person you're on a video call with, which is pretty awesome. Before we move on, I want to quickly mention the camera that's behind the teleprompter, which is the Elgato FaceCam Mark II, which is what I'm using to film this video right now. It is a webcam, so obviously it's not like this thing can compete with a real camera when it comes to filming videos like this, but for the price, I do think it's pretty good. Next, let's talk about what's powering all of these things. My main computer is this mid-range gaming PC from a couple of years back, which I placed down here to minimize clutter and keep the setup looking as simple as possible. I did toy with the idea of mounting it to the desk, but it's actually fairly massive and it turned out to be a bigger headache than I wanted to deal with. Now, I also have a laptop for work, so when I was redesigning my setup, I opted to also get this thing, which is the aptly named USB-C to dual HDMI 4K docking station with 100 watt PD pass-through from Arctis. And as the name implies, it's a docking station, which allows you to hook up any laptop to two HDMI displays via a single USB-C plug, which also has 100 watts of power delivery, making it a great fit for most laptops at only about an eighth or so the cost of something like the CalDigit TS4. Although I'd be happy to try that one out if CalDigit wants to send one my way. Hint, hint. Now, this docking station also comes with a bunch of extra ports, including SD and micro SD card slots, two USB-A ports, and an Ethernet connection, all in a very small form factor. I just tucked mine into the underside of my desk in order to have it be out of sight, but easy to reach whenever I want to plug my laptop into it. Also, speaking of laptops, I like being able to work from home and all, but the real reason I got this is actually so I could plug it into a MacBook, which I may be getting somewhat soon, to replace the M1 Mac Mini I had on my desk before, making this a truly capable hybrid setup. But I'll let you guys know when that happens, so make sure to subscribe to my channel to see what I got coming next. Now, before we get to the next section, let me briefly mention the other hubs I've got powering this setup. Mounted on the back of my primary monitor is this USB 3.0 switcher from Ugreen, which has 4 USB ports on the front and 2 outputs on the back, one running into my computer and the other one into my docking station, allowing me to quickly switch between devices with the press of a button for all the peripherals I've got hooked into this one hub. Then, underneath the right side of the desk, I've got this USB 3.0 hub from Natech, which is disturbingly called Moth. No clue as to why, other than to be creepy, I guess. Now, this was meant to power a whole bunch of stuff I had over on that side of the desk, but due to issues with the power supply, I ended up only using it for my microphone. Instead, I had to plug in this older USB-C combo hub from Satechi, which I had laying around, and strap it to the underside of my cable channel just to power some more of my devices. But since that still wasn't quite enough, I had to do the same thing once more with an even older USB hub from a company called Sweeks, which I think I bought back in like 2018 or something. Either way, all of this could definitely have been done in a simpler way, but as mentioned in another video I made recently, I tried to do proper cable management this time around and failed horribly. Now, if all of that sounds like a mess, then you'll be happy to know that we're about to soundly segue into a section that's a bit more sound. First off, we've got my trusted pair of Yamaha HS7s, which are a set of studio monitors that I've had for many years at this point. And these things are still great. They have great clarity, a decent amount of bass, and give a fairly neutral audio representation while not being boring in any way. They're definitely a bit big and mostly aimed at people who do music or sound design, but if you've got room for them, they're definitely amazing. I recently decided to upgrade my audio setup by adding these simple speaker stands, which I got from MaxMount, and I think it's safe to say that in terms of my speakers, they've really elevated them.
That was terrible.
Okay, all jokes aside, again, I'm no audiophile, but I do think they sound better now that they've been lifted up to aim at my ears rather than my chest, which, and correct me if I'm wrong here because I'm not a doctor, is not what you used to hear things. Other than that, it also makes the setup look a lot greater in my opinion, and even though you're technically not gaining any real space on your desk from this, I found that it does feel like it clears up a lot of real estate anyway. I've even put a couple of things on the feet of the speaker stands just to maximize the space. One of those things is the second set of speakers I have, which are the Creative Pebble V3s. Now, to be honest, I barely ever use these at all, but the idea is they function as a second pair of speakers, which are deliberately quite a bit lower quality than my primary ones, which I can switch to in order to have a reference point for how something sounds on different speakers, which is great when you're mixing music or vocals. Both sets of speakers are hooked into the Swissonic M-Control Plus, which allows me to quickly switch between them with the press of a button, and even allows me to switch between two different sets of input as well, one of which runs into my PC, while the other one runs into this, an old Apollo Duo Twin audio interface from Universal Audio. This is something that I've only ever used on my Mac when making music, and which I plan on using once again when I get a new MacBook. But for now, it's just kind of sitting there looking fancy without adding any real value. Next up is the microphone, which is a HyperX QuadCast, and this thing is way overdue for a replacement. The audio quality you get from this thing is decent enough if you use it correctly, which I have chosen not to do, mainly for aesthetics. That doesn't mean it's a bad microphone, and the fact that it's pretty much plug and play is great, but for my purposes, I definitely need to upgrade to something better soon. Holding up the microphone is the mount arm from Streamplify, and this thing is actually pretty cool. Not only does it work like any other basic mic arm, but it also has this long ridge running along the top side, which functions sort of like a cold shoe mount on camera gear, meaning you can mount stuff like lights, a phone holder, or whatever else you want on here. Until I got the teleprompter, I was actually using this to hold my iPhone for filming videos, and also a little light as well, making it a super practical all-in-one solution for people streaming or filming videos at their setup. As far as headphones, I recently got the Arctis Nova 7s from Steelseries. These are the Dragon Edition, not because I finally got around to watching Shang-Chi recently, but just because they were on sale. And while they're not perfect, I do really like them so far. I've got a full review of them coming up on my channel soon, so stay tuned for that. My second pair of headphones are the Beyerdynamic DT990 Pros, the high impedance version, which I've owned for a long time by now, and they certainly do have a lot of wear and tear on them. I only use them when making music, and they really are fantastic when it comes to that, but honestly, they're comfortable enough that I wouldn't even mind recommending them as everyday wired headphones if someone really wanted them. But there are a lot of other more easily accessible options on the market if that's what you're looking for. And finally, I keep both of my headphones out of sight but within reach with this little dual headset holder which I've mounted to the underside of my desk. Alright, that was a lot of audio gear, but I guess that's to be expected from a former musician. Next, let's talk peripherals. Since the last time I made a desk setup video, I've moved away from having wired peripherals, as well as from having any Logitech products other than a desk mat, which might have been a good choice overall. And while a lot of it has to do with me not focusing on game development anymore, I have to say it's also just incredibly convenient to be able to move your mouse and keyboard around without having to worry about a cable. Plus, I have this one USB-C cable tucked away at the back of the desk, which I use to charge my devices from time to time, so I never have to worry about them running out of juice.
You got the juice now, man.
The keyboard is the Keychron V1 Max, which is a 75% keyboard and a great budget option for those of you who are thinking about getting into the world of mechanical keyboards. It just so happens to be my first mechanical keyboard, and while I can say with certainty that it won't be my last, that's not because of a lack of quality, but rather the spark inside me that this thing has lit up. Again, you can find a full review on my channel if you like. Complementing the V1 Max is this silicone palm rest, also from Keychron, which fits perfectly underneath the keyboard and helps to keep my wrist elevated and comfortable even when typing for hours on end. The mouse is not the MX Master 3, despite what years of listening to YouTubers rant about how it's the best mouse ever might have made you think. And also despite the fact that it looks damn near identical to it. This is the Rappu MT760L, and yeah, it definitely does have a rather strong case of I copied your homework and didn't bother changing anything vibe to it, but what this thing lacks in originality, it more than makes up for in function. Not only can it do pretty much everything the MX Master 3 can, except when it comes to the quality of the main scroll wheel, which is admittedly a lot worse in this case, but it's also absolutely great for gaming. I've tested out quite a few devices over the course of my still brief career on YouTube, and so far, I'd say that if you're looking for one mouse that can do everything and do it pretty well, then the Rappu MT760L is the one to get. And finally, the only remaining piece of Logitech gear on my desk is this desk mat. And that's only because I have yet to find a bank that has enough cash on hand to give me a loan so I can afford one from GroveMade.
Oh my God!
Sitting way up on top of my secondary display is the Mi Computer Monitor light bar from Xiaomi. And I'm gonna be honest with you, if you've been thinking about getting a monitor light bar and you're not really sure whether it's worth it, or maybe you're saving up for one of those nice ones from BenQ, then honestly, just get this one. It's about a third or a quarter of the price. It has all the functionality you need, including a wireless puck to control the color temperature and brightness, and it lights up a desk really well. I've had mine for over a year and a half now, and it still works perfectly. This big light over here on the left is the Streamplify Glow Light 14, which I use as a key light for filming these videos. It's very affordable, takes up very little space at all, and works more than well enough for what I use it for, so if you need to have a light you can mount to your desk for filming or streaming stuff, then I definitely recommend it. Sitting on top of the Elgato prompter is this tiny RGB video light which I bought from Temu, and frankly this thing is not great. But then again, it was like $10 on Temu, so that's to be expected. The only reason I'm using this is because I actually had a Keylight Mini from Elgato sitting up here, which was absolutely great, but unfortunately, it decided to just stop working altogether after less than 6 months. So I'm not particularly inclined to want to invest in another one of those anytime soon. And finally, as I've mentioned in some of my other videos, I think it's super important to also personalize your space with something that matters to you. So I have this cute little lamp over here, which I got from my wife and daughter to always have them with me in everything I do. And since we're on the subject of smaller stuff, rounding out the decorations on the desk, I have a couple of small fake plants, most of which are from IKEA, a little candle for some ambiance, though I have yet to light it, as well as this card I got from my daughter for Father's Day. As far as cable management goes, I've got a whole video on how I tried to redo it recently and failed, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on it right now. But basically, I've got a cable channel to hide the power strips, a different type of cable channel from IKEA for the cables themselves, a cable spine to allow for some of the cables to run down from the desk while still being able to raise or lower the height of it, as well as various bits of cable ties, cable holders, and even some hooks that I screwed into the underside of the desk. Overall, even though my latest attempt at cable management didn't go the way I planned it, it still at least looks better than before, which was a pretty easy bar to clear, honestly. And finally, just off to the side, I've got two of the well-known Skodis pegboards from IKEA lined up vertically to hold a bunch of stuff that I use, including lights for filming, headphones, various cables, some cleaning equipment, and some music gear. There will be links to pretty much all of it in the description. But yeah, I was initially skeptical about how much weight the pegboards would be able to hold, but I've put some pretty heavy stuff up there, and this thing could easily hold 5 or 10 times as much as I've got on there now, so if you're considering getting one of these, I'd say go for it. Alright, that just about does it. Now, I know I titled this the ultimate hybrid desk setup, and as you can see, there are still a lot of things I would wish to improve or change, but honestly, that's just the nature of a desk setup. I don't think it's ever really complete. You know, there's a famous quote which goes along the lines of art is never finished, only abandoned, which I've seen attributed to Leonardo da Vinci among others. Hell, even George Lucas said a version of this and used it for justification for going back and adding new things to the original Star Wars trilogy, with universally beloved changes such as
McConkey.
Well, in a way, a desk setup is like a piece of art, except that in this case, you don't abandon it. You keep building, you keep adding, you keep changing things. Over time, you replace the monitors, the keyboard and mouse, the desk itself, until eventually not a single piece of the original setup remains. I'm not going to get into a ship of Theseus debate here, but the point is rather that a desk setup is never finished, and because they're rarely abandoned either, you get to improve and build upon yours, hopefully forever. Or maybe I called it the ultimate desk setup because it sounded better. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.